pretty cool. And yeah, I definitely want to get more Lord of the Rings models too. That's the other thing because I actually really like. Do I have a Lord of the Rings model on me? Let me see. I don't think I have one handy on me at the moment, but the Lord of the Rings models are made to a different scale than Warhammer Fantasy or 40K, where they call it like 28 millimeter historical, where the physique and the proportions of the models are a little more realistic. Let me see if I can find what I'm talking about. Sorry if you're hearing all sorts of. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. Okay. I have some examples here. Talk about this real quick. Oh, first, before I do that, give me a quick second. Okay. Okay. Uh, Bacon, although I'll just appreciate these Warhammer stuff from a distance. Yeah, of course. I'm not trying to be a pusher here, unlike some other people, trying to push hobbies onto other people. So, take a look at this model here. This is a this is not a Warhammer or Citadel miniature. It's not for 40K. It's not for Warhammer Fantasy. It's by a different company called Privateer Press, and they make a game called War Machine. For a while, it was considered like the main competitor to Warhammer 40K, just like how something like King of Fighters was like the competitor to Street Fighter, to use something relatable to Bacon. But yeah, this is a miniature from the game called War Machine. And this is what they call like 28 millimeter heroic scale. So, heroic scale is defined by somewhat exaggerated proportions. If you look at this guy's fist, for example, if we can get a little closer, if you look at this guy's fist, for example, they're gigantic ham hocks. They're gigantic pieces of roast beef. And his head is proportionately much larger than, like, realistically it should be. But somehow it kind of all cohesively comes together in a way that's very pleasing. The proportions, while exaggerated, still seem to feel human, and it's recognizably a human, right? Especially when you consider that this is going to be a miniature that you look at from afar on the battlefield, right? This is like, you're going to be looking at this guy from 6 feet away on a gigantic table. Suddenly, the gigantic out of proportion features don't seem so bad when you're looking at them from afar. It's a similar theory to why, like, in theater, the makeup is often exaggerated so that people from that are looking from far away can still see the expressions and the features of the actors, right? It's a somewhat similar idea. However, Lord of the Rings miniatures that are produced by Citadel are 28 millimeter historic. At least that's what it was called at the time. And this is a somewhat older model, so they have maybe kind of gone slightly more into the heroic scale over time. But if you take a look at this is still considered the same, like, proportion or scale rather, 28 millimeters, right? But look at the size of this guy's head and his hands. his hands and his feet are tiny, right? And the sword is actually is quite small as well. It's not this gigantic hunk of iron, right? And that's why they call this heroic scale. It's because it looks a little more appropriate. Sorry, historic scale. It looks a little more realistic, and it comes from like Napoleonic miniatures and strategy games, historical strategy games. It's kind of rooted in that, and I've kind of gotten more interested in this scale than the more exaggerated proportions of Warhammer. And this is an example of a Rider of Rohan that I've painted. And again, this is from Lord of the Rings, and it's considered historic scale, I think, at least. And yet, if we put it beside something like this Eldar, like, it doesn't seem to belong to the same scale, right? Because this is part of the heroic scale. Anyways, that's kind of like a little interesting thing that I've kind of been noticing in terms of like my taste in miniatures, I guess. Kind of getting more interested in the historic scale, slightly more realistic proportions.